I never thought I'd find myself in this situation, yet here I am, sharing my story about my wife's infidelity. My name is Mike, and I've been married to Jenna for over a decade. We have two kids, Lily and Ben, who are the light of my life. On the surface, everything looked fine. We had a nice house in the suburbs, a couple of cars, and our kids were involved in plenty of activities. But beneath that seemingly perfect facade, things were starting to unravel. It all began with small changes in Jenna's behavior. She started coming home late from work, claiming it was just a busy season. I didn't think much of it at first. After all, she is a dedicated school administrator, but soon I noticed her being more secretive. Her phone seemed glued to her hand, and she'd become defensive whenever I asked about her day. I brushed it off as stress from work, yet in the back of my mind something felt off. Then there was the music teacher, Mr. Thomas. Jenna always spoke highly of him, saying how talented he was and how much he inspired the kids. It was all harmless until I started noticing the glances exchanged between them during school events. At first, I thought I was being paranoid, but my gut was telling me something else. One Friday evening, I decided to surprise Jenna by picking her up from school. The kids were staying with their grandparents for the weekend, and I thought it would be a nice gesture. As I pulled into the school parking lot, I noticed Jenna's car parked beside Mr. Thomas's. I thought nothing of it at first. Teachers often stay late. But when I peeked through the window, I saw them sitting close together, laughing and sharing what looked like an intimate moment. My heart sank. I left the scene before they noticed me, trying to wrap my head around what I just witnessed. Once home, I felt a mix of anger, sadness, and betrayal coursing through me. I tried to dismiss it, telling myself it could just be friendly banter, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. I needed proof. I started noticing more signs. Her texts and calls had become more frequent, and she would often leave the room when I walked in. The following week was a blur. I became a detective in my own home, keeping tabs on Jenna and trying to catch her in a lie. I found myself checking her phone, which is something I never thought I'd do. One afternoon, when she left for an errand, I took a chance and grabbed her phone from the table. I found a series of messages between her and Mr. Thomas. They were flirty, intimate, and outright inappropriate. My heart raced and I felt sick to my stomach. The words were like daggers, each one cutting deeper into my chest. I confronted her that evening. I had everything: the messages, the proof, the evidence of her betrayal. When I confronted her, she went into full denial mode. "Mike, you're overreacting. That's just how we communicate about the kids," she said with an unconvincing laugh. I could see the panic in her eyes. The lies spilled out of her mouth like a broken faucet, each one more ridiculous than the last. "You wouldn't understand," she said, and I felt the anger boiling inside of me. How could she say that? I was the one who had been faithful, the one who had built a life with her. I pushed for the truth, my voice rising as I demanded an explanation. She finally broke down, but not in the way I expected. Instead of remorse, I was met with anger. "You never trusted me," she yelled, as if she were the victim in all this. It was infuriating. That moment marked a turning point for me. I realized I had been living with a lie, and the woman I thought I knew was gone. The emotional impact of this betrayal was overwhelming. I went from disbelief to anger, then sadness, and finally acceptance. I needed to take control of this situation. I couldn't allow Jenna to continue this affair, especially with someone who had access to our children's lives. This was about more than just my marriage. It was about their safety too. As I sat in the living room, staring at the wall, I made a decision. I would not only confront Jenna again, but also take steps to ensure that Mr. Thomas could no longer have a role in our children's lives. That was the first step in my plan for revenge. I would make sure she lost something she loved dearly. Part of me felt guilty for plotting revenge, but I also felt a sense of empowerment. I wouldn't be the victim in this story. I decided it was time to show Jenna that there would be consequences for her actions. I needed to strategize, to find a way to make Mr. Thomas pay for what he had done. The idea of him being with Jenna made me sick. He had crossed a line, and it was time for me to act. I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts and emotions as I prepared for the next steps in this twisted game. After that explosive confrontation, I was left with a mix of emotions that felt like a storm inside me. I was hurt, angry and determined to take action. I wanted to make Jenna realize the magnitude of her betrayal and how it affected not only me but also our children. In that moment, I knew I had to gather my thoughts and plan out my revenge against Mr. Thomas. I began by doing some research. I recalled the days when I would drop off and pick up Lily and Ben from school. Mr. Thomas was well liked among the parents and kids, and he had a way of charming everyone with his smooth talk and musical talent. But charm can be deceptive, and I was determined to expose his true nature to the school administration. One afternoon, I decided to pay a visit to the school when I knew Jenna would be busy with a meeting. I walked in with a calm exterior, but inside, I was a bundle of nerves. I went straight to the front office and introduced myself to the secretary, Ms. Davis. I asked if I could speak to the principal regarding a serious concern I had about Mr. Thomas and his interactions with parents and students alike. Ms. Davis eyed me quizzically but agreed to let me in. I was escorted to the principal's office, and as I entered, I was met with the stern gaze of Principal Harris. I took a deep breath, preparing myself to share my concerns. "Mr. Harris, I need to talk to you about Mr. Thomas," I began, my voice steady. "I believe he has been crossing professional boundaries, particularly with my wife." I could see the surprise on his face, but I pressed on. "I have reason to believe he has been engaging in inappropriate conversations with her that go beyond school matters." At first, Mr. Harris was skeptical, but I had some evidence to back up my claims. I discreetly shared screenshots of the text messages I had found on Jenna's phone, the ones that were flirty and suggestive. I explained how this behavior was not only unacceptable but also potentially harmful to the students. To my surprise, Mr. Harris listened intently. "I appreciate you coming forward with this, Mr. Williams," he said, his tone more serious now. "Inappropriate conduct is taken very seriously in our school. I will need to investigate this further." As I left the school, I felt a rush of adrenaline. I had taken the first step in dismantling the connection between my wife and her affair partner. But there was still more to do. I wanted to ensure that Mr. Thomas could not just brush this off or manipulate his way out of the situation. I started gathering more information about him. I reached out to other parents, casually mentioning my conversation with the principal and asking if they had noticed any strange behavior on Mr. Thomas's part. To my surprise, several parents had similar concerns. One mother, Linda, told me about an incident where she had overheard Mr. Thomas speaking inappropriately to a group of kids during practice. It seemed like I wasn't the only one who had suspicions. With this new intel, I decided it was time to escalate the situation. I organized a small gathering of concerned parents at my house. Over drinks and snacks, I brought up the conversation I had with Mr. Harris and encouraged others to share their experiences. The room buzzed with stories of Mr. Thomas's flirtatious behavior and questionable comments directed at both parents and children. By the end of the evening, we had enough to approach the school board collectively. I felt a sense of camaraderie and purpose. It was no longer just my fight. It was for all the families who wanted to protect their children from someone who should not be in a position of trust. As the days passed, I stayed in touch with the other parents, coordinating our efforts. We drafted a letter outlining our concerns and requesting a formal investigation into Mr. Thomas's behavior. I knew that if we banded together, it would have much more weight than if I acted alone. Meanwhile, Jenna remained blissfully unaware of my plans. She was too consumed by her own lies, claiming that everything was fine between us. I could see the facade she maintained, but it only fueled my desire for revenge. I would not let her continue living this double life without consequences. Then, one night, while lying in bed beside her, I overheard her talking on the phone with Mr. Thomas. I pretended to be asleep as she whispered sweet nothings, reassuring him that everything was fine. I clenched my jaw, my blood boiling as I listened to her lies about how she loved him and wanted to be with him. In that moment, I realized that I was not just fighting for my marriage. I was fighting for my children's stability and innocence. The next morning, fueled by a mix of rage and determination, I finalized plans for our parents' meeting with the school board. I needed to make this happen quickly. I knew I had to keep my composure around Jenna, but inside I was a tempest, ready to unleash hell on the man who had disrupted my life. As I prepared to confront this situation head-on, I felt a sense of clarity. I was no longer a passive participant in my life. I was taking control. It was time to put my plan into action and ensure that Mr. Thomas could no longer be a part of our world. I was done being the victim. The day of the school board meeting arrived, and I was a mix of nerves and resolve. I had gathered a group of supportive parents who were equally concerned about Mr. Thomas's behavior, and together, we were ready to confront the school officials with our collective evidence. I had rehearsed what I wanted to say, but as I sat in the waiting room, my heart raced and I fought off feelings of self-doubt. What if they didn't take us seriously? What if we were all just wasting our time? As we were called into the meeting room, I took a deep breath and squared my shoulders. The board members looked serious, with a few taking notes as we settled in. It felt a bit intimidating, but I knew we had to do this for the sake of our children. I started by introducing myself and the other parents, framing our concerns around the impact of Mr. Thomas's behavior on the children and the school's integrity. Each parent took turns sharing their stories, and as they spoke, I could see the members of the board taking notes and occasionally exchanging glances. I felt a wave of determination wash over me as I listened to their accounts of inappropriate comments and flirtatious behavior. Then it was my turn. I stood up, holding the printed screenshots of the messages I had found on Jenna's phone, and looked directly at the board members. This is not just hearsay. This is proof that Mr. Thomas has crossed professional boundaries, not only with my wife but potentially with other parents and students. I urge you to take this seriously and investigate his conduct. The board members sat in stunned silence as I laid out the seriousness of the situation. I could see some of them shifting uncomfortably in their seats. It was clear that they hadn't anticipated such a strong and united front from the parents. I watched as Principal Harris shifted in his seat, his face a mix of concern and disbelief. After I finished, I could feel the tension in the room. The board members began to whisper among themselves, deliberating the next steps. I sat down, my heart pounding, and hoped that we had made an impact. Then, in a surprising turn of events, one of the board members, a woman named Mrs. Jennings, spoke up. We take allegations of this nature very seriously. We will initiate a formal investigation into Mr. Thomas's conduct immediately, and we appreciate you bringing this to our attention. A sense of relief washed over me, but I knew this was just the beginning. We had done our part, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Mr. Thomas might still find a way to manipulate the situation. After the meeting, I exchanged contact information with the other parents, and we agreed to stay in touch as the investigation progressed. When I returned home, I felt a sense of accomplishment mixed with anxiety. I had taken a stand, but I still had to face Jenna. She was oblivious to what had transpired, happily chatting about her day as if nothing were wrong. It was surreal, like living in a parallel universe where she and I were worlds apart. Over dinner, I maintained a facade of normalcy, but inside I was a boiling cauldron of emotions. I kept waiting for the moment to confront her again, but I didn't want to tip her off about my plans just yet. I needed more time to gather everything I could on Mr. Thomas and Jenna as well. That night, while Jenna was in the shower, I took the opportunity to search for anything that would strengthen my case against her affair. I dug deeper into her social media accounts, combing through her past posts and messages. I wanted to find further evidence that could either confirm my suspicions or provide insight into her motivations. A quick scroll through her Instagram revealed photos of her and Mr. Thomas at school events, posing together with cheery smiles. I felt sick to my stomach seeing those images, each one a reminder of the betrayal I was dealing with. I clicked through more posts until I stumbled upon a private message thread between Jenna and a friend from college. My heart raced as I opened the conversation and quickly began reading. The messages were alarming. Jenna had been venting about our marriage, expressing dissatisfaction and frustration. But what struck me most was her admission of feeling alive and excited because of her interactions with Mr. Thomas. "He really gets me," she wrote. "It's like I'm finally being noticed again." I couldn't believe what I was reading. Everything I thought I knew about her, about us, was being systematically dismantled as I read her words. She was not only lying to me but also romanticizing her affair while portraying me as the villain in her story. When Jenna came out of the shower, I quickly closed my laptop and feigned innocence. I wasn't ready to confront her with this new knowledge just yet. I needed to use it to my advantage, to break her down piece by piece. Over the next few days, I became a master of disguise, acting as if nothing was wrong while internally strategizing my next move. I kept tabs on her every move. I started to notice more details: the way she texted under the table during dinner, the late-night phone calls she'd take in the other room. Each moment solidified my resolve to end this. With the investigation against Mr. Thomas underway, I knew I had to prepare for the fallout. The school board would likely reach out to Jenna for her side of the story, and I wasn't certain how she would react. Would she lie? Would she take responsibility? Regardless, I was ready for whatever came next. I had made my choice, and it was time to ensure that both Jenna and Mr. Thomas faced the consequences of their actions. I would protect my children and take back control of my life. The pieces were falling into place, and it felt like the storm was about to break. The days turned into a blur of tension as I waited for the fallout from the investigation. I felt like I was living in a pressure cooker, and every moment was filled with anticipation. I watched Jenna closely, observing her demeanor with an intensity I hadn't felt in years. She was still walking around our house with that same carefree attitude, blissfully unaware that the storm was brewing just outside her door. Then one evening, as I was cleaning up after dinner, my phone buzzed with an email notification. I opened it, and my heart sank. It was from the school board, outlining the next steps regarding the investigation into Mr. Thomas's conduct. They had interviewed several parents, including the ones who had attended our meeting, and they were taking the allegations seriously. There would be a formal hearing next week, and both Mr. Thomas and Jenna would be summoned for questioning. I glanced over at Jenna, who was sitting on the couch scrolling through her phone, laughing and chatting. She had no idea what was about to hit her. Part of me felt an overwhelming sense of justice, but another part of me was filled with dread. I knew that once the truth came out, it would shatter the illusion of our perfect life. That night after the kids went to bed, I decided to confront Jenna about her affair. I had been preparing for this moment, and I wanted to make it clear that I was no longer going to accept her lies. As we sat on opposite ends of the couch, I turned to her, my heart racing. "Jenna, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady but firm. She looked at me, surprised. "About what? Is this about the kids? They've been acting up at school, I know." "No, it's not about the kids," I replied. "It's about you and Mr. Thomas." Her expression changed instantly, the carefree facade slipping away. "What do you mean? That's just ridiculous. He's a teacher, Mike. You're being paranoid." "Am I? Because I have proof. I know everything," I said, my voice rising. "The messages, the way you talk about him, the late-night phone calls, it's all adding up. You're having an affair with him and you're lying to me." Jenna's eyes widened in disbelief, and for a moment it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. "You're wrong. You've got it all wrong, Mike. You're just trying to make me look bad," shrieked, her voice laced with panic. "No, Jenna, you're the one making yourself look bad," I countered, trying to keep my cool. "You've betrayed our marriage and you need to own up to it." Her reaction was explosive. "You never supported me. You never listened to me. You're the reason I felt like I had to seek attention elsewhere," she shouted, her anger shifting blame onto me. It was infuriating. Here I was, trying to get her to take responsibility, but she was deflecting every accusation. "Stop it, Jenna. This isn't about me," I exclaimed. "It's about you and your choices. You threw away our family for some thrill you thought you were missing. How could you do this?" Tears streamed down her face, but I didn't feel sympathy. I felt a deep sense of betrayal that overshadowed everything. "You think you can just throw me away like this? It's not that simple," she cried. "Then maybe you shouldn't have chosen to sleep with another man," I shot back. "This isn't just some misunderstanding. This is a choice you made, and now you have to face the consequences." I could see her processing my words, the realization slowly dawning on her. I continued, "There's going to be a hearing at the school next week. They're investigating Mr. Thomas's behavior, and trust me, you'll be called in to explain yourself." The realization hit her hard and the anger morphed into fear. "You can't do this to me. You're ruining my life," she pleaded. "Jenna, you did this to yourself," I said. "You made your choices and now it's time to deal with the fallout. I'm not going to sit here and let you drag me down with you." I could see the fear in her eyes, the panic starting to take hold. She realized that the life she had created with Mr. Thomas was crumbling around her. I wanted her to understand that this wasn't just about our marriage. It was about her integrity and the values she had compromised. The next few days were tense. Jenna was a bundle of nerves, and I could see her trying to mask her anxiety with anger. She was constantly on her phone, likely trying to reach out to Mr. Thomas for reassurance. My plan was working. She was feeling the pressure and I was ready to push it to the next level. On the day of the hearing, I prepared myself for the worst. I knew Jenna would try to manipulate the narrative, but I had gathered enough support from other parents to counter her lies. As we arrived at the school, I felt a mix of dread and excitement. This was it, the culmination of everything I had been building toward. The hearing was held in a large conference room, and I sat alongside several other parents. Jenna arrived a few minutes later, looking frazzled and disheveled. She glanced at me with a mixture of anger and despair, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction knowing that she was finally facing the consequences of her actions. Principal Harris presided over the meeting, and as he called the hearing to order, I could feel the tension in the air. He began by outlining the allegations against Mr. Thomas, and I watched as Jenna fidgeted in her chair. Several parents spoke up, sharing their experiences and concerns about Mr. Thomas's behavior. I was amazed at how much support I had, and I could see the school officials taking notes and asking pointed questions. When it was my turn, I stood up, my heart racing but my resolve stronger than ever. "I'm here today not just as a concerned parent but as a husband who has witnessed the destruction caused by Mr. Thomas's inappropriate behavior with my wife," I said, my voice steady. "What started as harmless interactions turned into a betrayal that has impacted my entire family." Jenna's face turned pale, and I could see the panic rising in her eyes as I revealed the text messages and described her relationship with Mr. Thomas. "This isn't just about the affair, it's about the trust that has been shattered and the impact on our children," I continued. As I finished speaking, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I had spoken my truth, and I hoped it would resonate with the school officials. I sat back down and watched as the board members exchanged glances, clearly processing what they had just heard. Jenna was next to speak, and I braced myself for her defense. She took a deep breath and began to spin her tale, claiming that I was controlling and that she was misunderstood. But the more she spoke, the more it sounded like a desperate attempt to shift blame. "Mr. Thomas is a good man," she said, her voice shaky. "He only wanted to help me feel appreciated." The board members looked skeptical as Jenna continued to weave her narrative, but I could see the cracks beginning to show. She was losing them with every word, and I felt a sense of satisfaction as I watched her unravel. As the hearing wrapped up, I knew we had made an impact. The board would take time to deliberate, but I felt hopeful that justice would prevail. I had confronted the chaos in my life head-on, and regardless of the outcome, I was stronger for it. That evening, as Jenna and I returned home, a heavy silence filled the air. I knew that things would never be the same between us, and I was ready to confront whatever came next. I had taken a stand, and there was no turning back now. The aftermath of the hearing was a whirlwind of emotions. I spent the next few days in a restless state, waiting for the school board's decision regarding Mr. Thomas. I knew that whatever the outcome, it would inevitably change the dynamics of our lives, and I was bracing myself for the fallout. Jenna was on edge. She had assumed a facade of normalcy, but I could see through it. The tension between us was palpable, and every time I looked at her, I was reminded of the betrayal. I was no longer the same person I had been before discovering her affair. I felt hardened, more resolute. On the day of the board's decision, I was a bundle of nerves, packing around the house as I waited for the phone call. I had told Jenna about the hearing's outcome, but she was playing it cool, pretending it didn't bother her. I knew better. She was just as anxious as I was. Finally, the phone rang. It was Principal Harris. I took a deep breath and answered, my heart pounding in my chest. Mr. Williams, I wanted to inform you that the board has made a decision regarding Mr. Thomas's employment. I listened intently as he explained the findings of the investigation. They had substantiated some of the allegations against Mr. Thomas, particularly the inappropriate nature of his interactions with the students and a clear case of boundary crossing with parents. I felt a rush of satisfaction as he informed me that Mr. Thomas would be suspended pending further evaluation. Thank you, Principal Harris, I said, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. This was important for the safety of our children. As I hung up the phone, I felt a mix of triumph and relief. I had taken action and had made a difference. But as the initial joy subsided, I was reminded that the fallout from Jenna's affair was far from over. When I turned to face Jenna, I found her standing in the kitchen, her expression unreadable. "What did he say?" she asked, feigning nonchalance. "Mr. Thomas has been suspended," I replied, watching her reaction closely. Her face fell, and in that moment I could see the anger bubbling beneath the surface. "You did this, didn't you? You had to ruin everything," she snapped. "It's not about ruining anything, Jenna," I replied, trying to stay calm. "It's about protecting our children and holding people accountable for their actions." She crossed her arms and glared at me. "You act like you're the hero in all of this. You don't even realize how this is affecting me, do you?" I couldn't believe the audacity. "You brought this on yourself, Jenna. You chose to betray me, and then you had the nerve to blame me for trying to fix it." The argument escalated quickly, with Jenna throwing every accusation she could at me. "You never cared about my feelings. You just want to punish me for wanting to feel good about myself." It was infuriating to hear her twist the narrative. "This isn't about me punishing you. This is about you realizing the consequences of your choices. You had an affair, and now you're acting like a victim." The conversation hit a boiling point, and it became clear that our marriage was hanging by a thread. Jenna wasn't showing any signs of remorse. She was only concerned about her own image. I had fought hard to defend our family, but it felt like I was fighting against a wall. In the following days, Jenna seemed more desperate. She tried to reach out to Mr. Thomas, but I had already taken steps to ensure that contact wouldn't happen. I had contacted the school board and requested that they inform Jenna that any communication with Mr. Thomas during his suspension would not be tolerated. I was done playing games. I was not going to let her drag me and our children further into this mess. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, Jenna confronted me again. "You can't keep me from talking to him. I deserve to make my own choices." "No, you deserve to face the consequences of those choices," I replied firmly. "You think this is just about you. You have children who look up to you, and you're willing to throw it all away for some thrill." She scoffed. "You don't understand what it's like to feel invisible. I wanted to feel alive again. By cheating on your husband, by lying to our kids, that's your solution." I shot back, feeling the anger boil inside me. "You're being selfish, and it's time you see that." The argument escalated again, and I felt emotionally exhausted. I realized it was no longer about trying to salvage our relationship. It was about protecting my children and ensuring they didn't have to witness their mother's reckless behavior. Days turned into a week, and the tension in the house was suffocating. As the investigation into Mr. Thomas continued, I began to contemplate my next steps. I started looking into separation options. It became clear to me that Jenna was not going to change, and I could no longer trust her. My priority was to create a stable environment for Lily and Ben, and I was prepared to do whatever it took to protect them. One evening, I sat down with my kids for dinner. They were blissfully unaware of the chaos that was happening around them, and I wanted to keep it that way as long as possible. I smiled at them, cherishing the innocence they still had. I wanted to shield them from the reality of their mother's choices. After the meal, as we sat together watching cartoons, I couldn't help but think about how this situation had changed not only me, but also how I would approach parenting moving forward. I wanted to ensure they didn't grow up thinking betrayal was acceptable or that love meant lying. When I returned to my room that night instead of facing Jenna, I took a moment to breathe and reflect. I realized that I had a choice too. I could choose to move forward, to create a new life for myself and my children. I would no longer be defined by Jenna's actions. I had fought hard to protect what mattered, and I was determined to create a safe haven for my kids. As I lay in bed, I made the decision that I would file for separation. I needed to take control of my life and my future. Facing the consequences of Jenna's affair would not only help me heal, but would also show my kids that they deserved better. The next day, I scheduled a meeting with a lawyer to discuss my options. I was ready to step into this new chapter of my life, no matter how difficult it might be. As I took this step, I felt a sense of empowerment. I would be the one to rebuild my family, even if it meant starting from scratch. I had fought for my dignity, and now I would fight for my happiness. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. I met with the lawyer and discussed the ins and outs of separation, ensuring that I would have custody of Lily and Ben. I was determined to make this transition as smooth as possible for them, and I wanted to protect them from any unnecessary drama. As we strategized, I felt a sense of clarity. I was no longer a victim. I was taking the reins of my life. When I returned home, I knew I had to talk to Jenna. She had been walking around in a haze, her anger slowly morphing into desperation as the situation with Mr. Thomas lingered in the air like a heavy fog. I could see the cracks in her facade, and I recognized that she was beginning to understand the consequences of her choices. One evening, I asked her to sit down after the kids had gone to bed. I needed to be clear and direct about my intentions. As we sat across from each other, the tense silence was almost unbearable. Jenna, I started, my voice steady. I want you to know that I'm filing for separation. Her eyes widened, a mix of surprise and anger flashing across her face. You can't be serious. You're just going to throw away our entire life together over this. It's not just about the affair, I replied, holding my ground. It's about trust, respect, and the values we promised to uphold as a family. You've shown me that you're not willing to fight for those anymore. Her reaction was immediate. She launched into a tirade, blaming me for everything that had gone wrong in our marriage. You never cared about my needs. You never even tried to understand me, she screamed. But I stood firm, refusing to let her divert the conversation. This is about your choices, Jenna. You made your bed with Mr. Thomas, and now it's time for you to face the consequences. Our marriage cannot survive this. As we argued, I felt the emotional weight begin to lift. I had spent too long trying to salvage something that was already broken. I was no longer invested in her excuses or her attempts to manipulate me. I was ready to move forward. The following days were filled with discussions about the logistics of our separation. I made it clear that I wanted to keep things as amicable as possible for the kids' sake. Jenna, however, was not making this easy. She continued to lash out, trying to manipulate the narrative and paint herself as the victim in front of friends and family. But I had my support network. I confided in close friends about what had unfolded, and they rallied around me. I found strength in their encouragement and began to rebuild my support system. I enrolled in a parenting course to ensure I was equipped to navigate this new phase of my life, focusing on being the best father I could be for Lily and Ben. As the separation process unfolded, I made sure to keep lines of communication open with my kids. I talked to them about what was happening in a way they could understand, reassuring them that they were not at fault. I wanted them to know that we were still a family, even if things looked different. When the time came to finalize the separation, I felt a mix of bittersweet emotions. I had fought hard for my dignity, and now I was stepping into a new chapter of my life. I had learned so much about myself throughout this process, about resilience, about standing up for what I believed in, and about the importance of self-respect. The day I signed the separation papers, I felt a strange sense of liberation wash over me. It was official. I was no longer tied to a relationship that had turned toxic. I took a deep breath and reminded myself that I was doing this not just for me, but for my children. They deserved a father who was happy and whole. After everything settled down, I made it a point to establish routines with Lily and Ben. We started going on weekend outings, exploring parks, and finding new hobbies together. I wanted to create a joyful environment that was free from the tension that had consumed our household for so long. As the months passed, I began to heal. I started to find joy in the little things again, whether it was playing catch with Ben in the backyard or having craft time with Lily. I learned that my worth was not determined by Jenna's actions. I was stronger than I had ever realized. In time, I even began to explore dating again, cautiously dipping my toes back into the world of relationships. I wasn't rushing into anything. I wanted to take the time to understand what I truly wanted in a partner. The lessons I learned from my marriage were invaluable, and I was determined to choose wisely this time. Looking back, I could see how far I had come. The pain of betrayal was still there, but it was no longer the defining factor of my life. I had taken my power back, and in doing so, I had created a future for myself and my children that was full of hope. As I reflect on this journey, I want to share a few pieces of advice for anyone who might find themselves in a similar situation. First, know your worth. Don't let someone's betrayal define who you are. Second, surround yourself with supportive people who will lift you up and encourage you to heal. Lastly, always fight for your family, but remember that sometimes part of that fight means letting go of what no longer serves you. Life is unpredictable, but I learned that I could face any storm, as long as I stayed true to myself. As I look at my kids playing happily in the yard, I know one thing for sure. I am ready for whatever comes next.